Alien Isolation is the kind of game you have to be really in the right mindset for. It does a fantastic job capturing the junky, techno-capitalist space future of the Alien franchise, and soon to be our real life, and manages to have just enough gameplay and spatial diversity to keep that ambience from being its sole attraction. If you like Alien, you should play it. If you like moody, suspenseful stealth games, you should probably play it. If you're just a fan of old-fashioned sci-fi or incredibly atmospheric, tense games, you should probably play it. While it doesn't have the meat on its bones to have a huge lasting appeal, the things it does right are done so well that you'd have to be deliberately obtuse to overlook them. I'll get into the exact details of the fine line that separates a one-dimensional experience from a focused experience, but it's worth noting that Isolation manages to balance a compact, well-defined game space and simple, straightforward gameplay in a way that should be incredibly boring and formulaic, but usually isn't. Rather than go through the entire game with a fine-toothed comb and ruin the entire experience for someone who's overlooked it for 6 years, let's talk about some key points, both positive and negative, which make the game stand out. For some of my perceived positives might be not positives. For others, my negatives might be massive upsides. I mentioned first the ambiance and design of the Sevastopol. It manages to admirably capture the crappy, sparking, poorly lit future that we're all destined to reside in. Creative Assembly apparently got their hands on a lot of the original production material from 20th Century Fox, so everything looks and works and frequently doesn't work in a fashion truly faithful to Weyland-Yutani specification. Remember, you're all expendable to us, because we really need an alien for the megacorporation science fair. Tyrell Corp keeps making sexier robots, and we can't keep up with that shit. The environments are largely claustrophobic and retromechanical, with some more open areas sprinkled in to circumvent total exhaustion. Radios click with static and everything is a CRT displaying about 15p. It's moody and eerie and familiar. It also blends these very familiar facets with more original pieces to give you views of the alien universe that aren't often seen. This is where the game encounters its first and potentially largest upside-downside scenario. It is clearly, lovingly crafted by people for whom Alien really meant something, artistically, thematically, or even just nostalgically. And if you carry those same feelings, you'll be engaged by all the care that went into manufacturing a very believable game area around such a beloved sci-fi staple. If you don't have the same history, the lack of familiarity and context might cause them to be less spectacular. And without that desire to really chew that scenery, I could see it being perceived as flat, merely a meaningless polygonal space to avoid an equally meaningless polygonal enemy. That type of person would probably be better served by a game like, say, Outlast, where you run, hide, and survive in a space that's more traditional for a horror game. Branching off that, the length of the game stands in another positive-negative duality. My first playthrough, knowing nothing of what awaited me on hard, playing at a careful, stealthy, glacial pace that can only be accurately described as European extreme, I finished Alien in about 20 hours. Which, depending on who you are, is either a really good chunk of time to spend bumming around an alien-infested space station, or way too goddamn long. Again, this'll depend on who you are. I frankly found it a bit long. I'm not one to routinely say that games should have less content, but I feel like the impact of Isolation is lessened by how comfortable I began to get on the Sevastopol. Once I had a decent handle on the limitations of the various AI, I stopped fearing them. A shorter, more compact game would prevent the player from forming that familiarity. I feel like you could cut probably 20 to 25% of the game out, and it would become more replayable, more accommodating to speed and challenge runs, and ultimately better as a result of condensing the peak's attention and narrative delivery. I'm not a game developer, and I'm not roasting Creative Assembly about this. I largely enjoy their work, and I don't want to Monday morning quarterback their game development, but I do stand by that opinion. Isolation drags a bit, especially just after the midpoint. Cutting out one or two of the android-only or retread ground areas could do a lot to tidy up the pacing of the game. That said, I don't think the little bloat around the midsection tanks the game on the old review score. I also don't score these. As a second positive, and somewhat tangential to the first point, you, Amanda Ripley, are a Weyland-Yutani engineer. You solve engineering problems. You do engineering things. Your abilities and capacities are largely as believable as the space station you ruefully inhabit. You have a wrench, a big wrench hammer thingy. You have a Game Boy that can hack stuff. You have a tiny, tiny blowtorch. These are the tools that you use to tackle the challenges ahead. Challenges such as turning the power on, opening doors, operating a radio, turning the power off, conducting elevator maintenance, turning the power on, trying to operate a radio a second time, conducting reactor maintenance, communications array realignment, and finally, the pièce de résistance, the ultimate form of stellar engineering, the secret technique to outwit the xenomorph, the manual deflector dish detachment sequence from Star Trek First Contact. The point is this: you're an engineer. Most of the tasks you find yourself faced with must be tackled in the way that an engineer would tackle them. Murdering something with a shotgun is never your primary objective. You aren't a colonial marine. Run, hide, survive, and if all else fails, just blow up the reactor and ride that baby down like a meteor. It's a pretty radical way to die. I'm going to categorize the narrative overall as another positive. This is again up for interpretation, but I'd argue that Alien Isolation is probably the best piece of alien media to happen since Aliens. Characters aren't amazing. Everything really happens how you'd expect, but there's enough subversion and misdirection to prevent it from being a one-to-one remake of Alien, and enough integrity and passion for the source material to prevent it from devolving into horrible action schlock. It feels like a greatest hits album of an Alien tribute band. It's very reminiscent, but not the same. It's a love letter. Again, we're having a lot of those. One that anyone who really loves Alien or slow-paced survival horror should really get their hands on. It doesn't sell out the Alien name for some cheap scares and busted gameplay. I never really experienced the same events that other players seem to have that make them laud the Alien's AI. While it was pervasive and often more thorough than I would have imagined, it has its blind spots. Its scriptings, its weaknesses to being exploited with the might of the human mind. It can't see over objects very well, actually. Even on harder difficulties, a steady, stealthy approach and a quick hand on the flamethrower often leaves the alien frustratedly scurrying about as you watch it futilely searching for another victim. But the victim was behind some boxes the whole time. So try it out. You'll probably know after the first few hours if it's right for you, and it can be had for a pittance on your game-playing device of choice whenever your picked poison of a corporate overlord rings the sale bell. If the lifetime sales are high enough, they might make another one, and this is exactly the type of game that technological advancement would really improve with every iteration. A game designed so heavily around lighting, ambiance, and design will excel when all of those things are more believable, more dynamic, and more sophisticated. So a next-gen Alien game with ray-traced lighting, higher resolution textures, and more CPU dumped directly into an alien brain is pretty much a linear improvement. The wrap to this being, if you really love Alien, you should play this game. But if you love Alien, you probably already have played this game, so I don't know why I'm telling you this. If you don't love Alien, you might not be super into playing this game. But if that's the case, you probably already decided to pass on this game half a decade ago. And so I don't know why I'm telling you this. I actually don't really know what the point of this whole exercise was, to be honest.